Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you're connecting in with us from, wherever you're joining us from today. I'm Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, and I'm thrilled to have you with us today for 10 ways for colocation data centers to find the right niches and avoid commoditization. Again, I'm Joshua Feinberg. I help companies in and around the data center ecosystem differentiate, get found much earlier on in the buyer's journey, achieve trusted advisor status, and command premium pricing power. I've presented on topics very similar to this at some of the industry's most popular conferences, including Critical Facilities Summit, Data Center World, Data Center Dynamics, HostingCon, and MSP Expo. I've served on the boards of a number of IT, product, and entrepreneurial marketing and sales-related organizations, and I'm a former contractor for both IBM and Microsoft, and was involved with the HubSpot partner ecosystem for the better part of 10 years and led a HubSpot user group community evangelism campaign around the same time. I bring more than 20 years of experience in and around managed services and colocation data centers, specifically at the intersection of go-to-market, digital marketing, and sales enablement. In addition to colocation, in the wider data center ecosystem, including technology companies, facility-related companies, construction, real estate, and sales and marketing-related companies, the full stack. DCSMI is all about elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. When I plan a webinar like this, especially focused on adding as much value as possible. And one of the ways that I do that is when people register for this webinar, I ask them, what's the biggest sales and marketing challenge you're currently going through? So we can see there up on the screen is the consensus around that, and that'll drive a lot of the question and answer session that I'll be hosting towards the end of today's webinar. And as you can see up there on the screen, things like finding the right customers, sales cycle for data center related business, growing the business, creating and executing a demand generation plan, and getting access to key decision makers are all top of mind for many of you, for most of you that are with us on today's webinar. So what is specifically on the agenda for today? We're going to start by talking about the importance of providing managed services, but not necessarily as a managed service provider. Then we'll turn our attention to how to assess your product market fit and what that means to finding the right niches and avoiding commoditization. Then we'll turn our attention to how to get in front of today's colocation buyers and specifically their buyer's journey and what's changed so much in recent years and what you need to do about it. How to analyze your competitive positioning. This is always one of the most popular segments of this session. How to take stock of your content assets or lack thereof, maybe your content liabilities, as the case may be. Then we'll look at what it takes to attract the right strangers. We'll get into a few best practices on how to generate more highly qualified leads, what it takes to accelerate more of those leads into great sales opportunities. And as we head down the final stretch, we'll talk about what it takes to scale revenue growth across both new and existing clients, how to let your best clients' data and buyer personas dictate your niches. So niche, easily two different ways to pronounce it: potato, potato, tomato, tomato, and why that's so important. As we close out today's webinar, I'm going to introduce you to some recommended resources, and there will also be a special offer. So if you're curious about what that special offer is, I'd encourage you to stay for the entire webinar, and then we'll turn our attention to the question and answer session, first starting with the questions that were sent ahead of time. And if you have questions that come up during today's webinar, feel free to drop those in the chat pane, and we'll try to get to as many of those as possible. So when it comes to finding the right niches and avoiding commoditization, there's basically two battlefronts that you need to be prepared to compete in. First is dealing with company size related issues. There's four broad categories of colocation providers that I'll introduce you to in a moment, but do you have the benefit of having a globally or nationally recognized brand like some of the logos that you see listed there, which, by the way, none of them have a commercial relationship with DCSMI. That's why we were able to use these more freely here. And how to differentiate and make sure that you boost your anti-commoditization superpowers. So first, we're looking at the battlefront that your company competes in, and then we're looking at the battlefront that you as an individual go-to-market professional across either sales, marketing, customer success, product, or channel partnerships in which you need to be prepared for. So when it comes to your company size or brand, I'm really curious if you could let us know in the chat pane. Is your company one global, like you have more than 1,000 employees with dozens, maybe there's a couple handfuls of companies that have hundreds, but at least dozens of data centers? Are you a national colocation provider, anywhere from 200 to 1,000 employees with a minimum of 10 data centers? Are you a regional colocation operator, colocation provider with anywhere from 50 to 200 employees with 3 or more data centers? Or are you local, less than 50 employees and maybe 1 or 2 data centers? So it'd be great if you could let us know there in the chat pane. So what's interesting about that is when I've presented this topic at some of the big conferences, I originally thought the core audience that would be most interested in this topic, picking the right niches and avoiding commoditization, would be local and regional colocation operators. But I was wrong. Actually, quite a few session attendees from mid-size, enterprise-size, very large-size colocation operators and providers came to these sessions, and through a show of hands, kind of the in-person equivalent of doing a live stream or a webinar, as well as survey feedback and post-session anecdotes and compliments, told a very, very different story and found that this topic actually resonated with some of the big national and global colocation operators. And individual contributors and leaders of the executive teams told me that highlighting what's going on, both some of their strengths and weaknesses relative to local and regional colo competition, they found was very enlightening. So that's at a company level. When it comes to your differentiation and your superpowers for anti-commoditization at an individual level, and this is a brand new way of kind of approaching this. This is the first time I've presented this talk post-pandemic. Gave this talk a number of times in the mid to late 2010s. It's the first time I've gone back and updated this for what's truly going on in today's data center marketplace and the buyer's journey. And I kind of put most people into two different camps. You're either a horizontal colocation rep, meaning that you're a generalist and you market and sell colocation to anyone with a valid form of payment. In some cases, for small colocation providers, it may be even cryptocurrency. But the more Mainstream colocation operators and providers are typically looking for credit card or wire transfer or something like that. So the horizontal colocation provider, I'm calling the holo. Get it? Colo, holo, horizontal colo provider. And then there's the vertical colocation expert as opposed to the generalist. The volo is well positioned to stand out from the crowd. The volo is deeply niched around a narrowly defined industry or specialization. And that's incredibly important because instead of having to beg prospects to pay attention to you, they want to take the conversation with you because it feels like free consulting. It kind of has the vibe if they were to engage a big four consulting firm like KPMG, Deloitte, PwC, EY, or just a smaller version of that. It feels that good. It feels like truly consultative. It feels like diagnosing before prescribing. And it's incredibly important that you bring that Volo vibe, that Volo positioning to most of what you're going to do going forward with colocation. Because it's this stage of the game with where we are calendar-wise, year-wise, with as mature as the colocation space is, there's a lot of commoditization going on. And if you don't have the benefit of being able to lean back on a big national or global brand, you need to more than ever lean on your own personal brand. And even if you are part of a big national or global brand, there's a really good chance that you would do well by specializing in a particular kind of business, a particular kind of industry. So not only can you answer your prospects and customers' questions, you can share unique insights about how others just like them are approaching these same issues. So you're able to anticipate not just where they are now, but where they're going to go step 2, 3, 4, 5. If you think about 3 stages of the journey: awareness, consideration, and decision. And we'll get into this at a little more detail in a few minutes. At a broad level, that's the step that people go through. And most of the industry research firms are now finding as many as 28 individual touch points need to happen between a complete stranger and a purchase decision. So the goal is to be involved in as many of those as possible in the right kind of context. So where does this all start? Well, it starts by providing managed services, but not necessarily as a managed service provider. And this is a paradigm shift that most in the colocation space are missing. We think about managed services 20 years ago, outsourced virtual IT, fractional CIO for small and medium-sized businesses. They were selling things like remote access, server log monitoring. This was the golden age of platforms like Microsoft Back Office, Small Business Server, SBS, pre even it being called being a managed service provider. This is what I cut my teeth with when I built my own IT consulting firm and did the content provider work for Microsoft small business channel partner teams in the late 90s and early 2000s. So fast forward ahead about a decade to early cloud, early SaaS, early 2010s. It was still outsourced virtual IT for small and medium-sized businesses, but both in the US and globally, it was going through a major economic downturn. Because of the release of the iPhone a few years earlier, this was a game-changing, transformative technology. It accelerated mobile computing, which led to the need for mobile device management, remote management and monitoring services, Google Apps, now known as Google Workspace, G Suite along the way, Amazon Web Services, Salesforce, all became much bigger forces in the IT space, in the IT services space. The client-server refresh cycle, gravy train, had largely slowed down or stopped altogether. And managed service providers and data centers were still largely a completely different business model. If we think about managed services compared to colocation today, if we look at the CEO of a MSP with 11 to 50 employees, their clients want hosting, cloud, web apps, managed services, still that single point of contact. More than ever, they're getting involved in voice-based communications, database communications, in many cases. And this is how I originally got involved in the colocation space 10 years ago, after working with IT consulting firms and managed service providers from the late 90s into the early 2010s. I saw the ones that didn't become accidental nonprofits go in one of 3 directions. One, they either moved mid-market into ERP, enterprise resource planning, because there were still significant dollars being spent on implementation and supporting customization around there. So they moved into either ERP, custom software development, like building mobile apps and web apps, or something colocation related. And the ones that moved into colocation were either getting a box of their own, putting it in a colocation facility and selling out slices of that to their individual clients, or a client of theirs was leading the initiative and said, we're going to put a box or two or three in a colocation facility. We don't have a deep bench of IT talent. We want you to be that talent that goes into the colocation facility and assists with the provisioning and ongoing management, onboarding, patching, everything that needs to be done with that on a regular basis. So there was this this attitude that kind of permeated around account control, account management. If we better manage that or someone else will, we have the best people, we have the best service and the best price. The colocation CEOs, similar sized, very heavily locally focused at that time. Their SMB clients have a quicker sales cycle and need more professional services than mid-market and enterprise clients. That's still the case today. Partners selectively engage with MSPs, but they recognize that they're not very good at marketing and sales. Neither party tends to be really good at marketing and sales, but colocation in many cases tends to be a little bit better, capitalized. They can have a little bit more upside if they really think through what they're doing. And again, that's the same basic attitude that we better manage that asset, we better manage that service, or someone else will. And of course, you should hire us because we have the best people, the best service, and the best price. That's their point of differentiation. And so in a lot of ways, the commoditization struggles that MSPs faced 10 years ago are pretty much at the doorstep of most small and mid-sized colocation operators today, where colos and MSPs are now chasing the exact same small business. Interestingly enough, that's the same business that the two other dominant professional services models in the space also revolve around. If you think about, besides outsourced IT services, fractional CIO, there's fractional finance, accounting, bookkeeping services done by CPA firms and bookkeeping firms. That's another big dominant kind of professional services that chase the same SMB owner, as well as outsourced marketing and advertising. So you have these low margin professional services businesses that struggle to scale. But in reality, is if you look carefully at the MSP and the colocation provider, they're a lot like siblings, warring siblings or first cousins. In many cases, commoditization is now crushing the small, the local, and even some of the regional providers in this space. And again, it looks a lot to me like the struggles and the challenges that MSPs and hosting companies pulled out their hair with a lot of times in the last decade. Many colocation providers think that one of the best solutions is to recruit an army of managed service providers. However, unless you've really thought through the point of demarcation between what you do and they do, and you're ready to actually build a legit channel partner program, a lot of this may be just a hope and a prayer. There's a lot that goes into the best practices around data centers attracting great channel partners. It's something that I've consulted with dozens of colocation operators on in the past. It's a huge area of interest if that's something that you need to work through. But again, think through these issues, because if you feel like you're going after the exact same clients and the exact same playbook, the trust just isn't going to be there. Next up, I want to talk with you today about how to assess your product market fit, PMF. What is product market fit? This is the degree to which your colocation offering satisfies strong demand in the market. You have scaled beyond just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You've scaled to a significant amount where you're cash flow positive, you break even, it's a healthy business. And then the idea of product market fit has its roots in the venture capital product development world. Which, interestingly enough, if you look at a lot of the private equity type of firms that invest in the regional and large national and global colocation providers, a lot of them are REITs, real estate investment trusts, which have a lot of similarities with venture capital and private equity. So even if you think your company isn't ready to approach with this kind of mindset, recognize that most of the slightly bigger, and in some cases a lot bigger, companies that you compete with do bring this mindset to the table. So how do you know if you as a colocation provider have product market fit? Well, there's two factors. How tight are your buyer personas? How well do you know the most important stakeholders that you engage with? And is that reflected in your case studies? And second, how well do you know your metrics? And we'll get into some of those really important metrics to pay attention to shortly. So just to make sure we're on the same page, a buyer persona is a semi-fictional representation of one of your ideal clients based on real data and select educated speculation about demographics, behavioral patterns, motivations, and goals. What gets them a big promotion if they get right? What gets them the opposite of promotion and could put their job and perhaps their career in jeopardy if they mess up? If you skip this, it's not a very good outcome. It's really hard to stand out from the crowd in today's marketplace where so many colocation providers, operators are facing commoditization. The key performance indicators that I'd encourage you to pay close attention to are knowing what a client is worth over its lifetime, the average client lifetime value or LTV, knowing what you're currently and what you're planning on investing to acquire a client like that, the average cost of client acquisition, sometimes called the COCA, the COCA, or sometimes also referred to as CAC, client acquisition cost, and how long it takes from a complete stranger to get to the point that they're signing on and ready to be onboarded, that's your average sales cycle length. So how does a colocation provider, operator know if they have product market fit? So if we think about, as you see there up on the grid, we have three fictional type of colocation stakeholders you might be dealing with: a CTO, Tom, a CFO, Fred, and a compliance, Connie. And obviously you'd want to build these out, and they certainly vary by your business model, your industry, your focus, and your size. Let's assume we have three different personas that we're targeting. We're probably prioritizing our primary as Tom. This may actually be in the right order. Our secondary might be Fred, and compliance, Connie, may be tertiary, maybe our third most important buyer persona when push comes to shove and we have limited resources to go around. So to the extent that we know the lifetime value, the cost of acquisition, and the average sales cycle length for each of those three, we'll know we're either at product market fit or very close to that. The big thing is if you sell to or partner with colocation operators, in other words, if you're attending this webinar with the idea that you're not a colocation operator, but you work really closely with them, the issues are all the same, only the names will change, to quote the philosophers John Bon Jovi and Richie Sambora all the way back in the late 80s. If you're Gen X and you appreciate that kind of music, you'll appreciate that quote. If not, you'll wonder, what the heck is Joshua Feinberg talking about here? But trust is incredibly important. So you'll know if you have product market fit regardless of who your buyer personas are. So for example, if you sell to or partner with colocation providers or CISOs, if you sell cybersecurity, or if you sell to network operating system managers, network operating center managers, you'll have a similar sense of like what a client like that is worth, what it costs to acquire, and how long they are in the sales cycle. That's the key thing of knowing if you have product market fit. And this is very, very real. I remember a couple of years back when I was putting together one of the iterations for a big conference, and someone that I just work with sent a message back and said that they were not going to be able to keep going down the path that they're going because they went back to the drawing board and they realized that the sales model that the previous leadership regime had been pursuing was no longer effective, and they needed to really rebuild and revamp and start from scratch. So what does it take to get in front of today's colocation buyer's journey? What does it take to really be proactive and not feeling the crushing weight of commoditization? A key part of that is recognizing just how much the world has changed. The latest research from Gartner found that 83% of a typical buyer's journey, which includes researching, comparing options, and evaluating pricing, is now over before you get to meet a prospect. That is a massive change from as recently as 5 or 10 years ago. I remember in the mid-2010s, the predominant number that was talked about widely was 56% from CEB, the Corporate Executive Board that's now part of Gartner. What that meant is 56% of the sales cycle, the buyer's journey, was over before you got to meet a prospect. Now it's 83% and accelerating even faster. Why is that? Because our entire lives are on one big remote control that's run by our smartphone, right? Everyone is used to immediate gratification. We're looking at our devices dozens, if not hundreds of times a day. If you don't personally order groceries or arrange rides or fares or stream or do your banking or whatever on your phone, almost certainly your buyer personas do. So this is a very real factor. I call it kind of the Veruca saltification of the world. If those of you that have ever seen the movie Willy Wonka's Chocolate Factory, Charlie and the Great Glass Elevator, the 2 or 3 different versions that are out there, there was a spoiled child who always needed immediate gratification, Veruca Salt, and one of her catchphrases was, "Don't care how, I want it now." Everyone wants everything immediately. And because of that, that's how we've ended up with the importance of being prepared for the self-propelled buyer's journey. People have developed a severe allergy to spending time with traditional sales professionals, and they'll do anything possible to navigate around you. And this isn't just edge cases. McKinsey discovered 70 to 80% of B2B buyers now have these preferences for a digital buyer's journey. So one of the most important ways to stand out is your content, your thought leadership, your subject matter expertise needs to stand in a lot of time for what used to be these one-on-one conversations. But it's crowded. If you look at where we are on the calendar, it's not like 10, 15 years ago where you getting in the webinar business or ebook business or blogging or video business was a big novelty. There's a really good chance that in your space, you're going to have to work really, really hard to cut through the noise, stand out from the clutter, and really develop meaningful differentiation. And we need to be present throughout the full buyer's journey, because 90% of the time when a new potential client comes to me and asks me what I think of what's going on with their existing approach, they're overweighted and really only have significant assets in the decision stage, which means that they're completely asleep at the wheel for the first 83% of the buyer's journey. When people are asking questions, figuring out what goals they're trying to solve, trying to address challenges, trying to figure out what a solution may look like to what's keeping them up at 2 o'clock in the morning, causing them to miss out on vacation time and time away from their loved ones, stressing them out, putting their job in jeopardy, all the stuff that goes on in the awareness and consideration stage, they're completely absent from. And if you want to pick the right niches and avoid commoditization, it's really crucial that you heed this wake-up call, that it's critical that your entire go-to-market team focus on being seen as educators, subject matter experts, teachers, trusted advisors, consultants, and thought leaders throughout the entire buyer's journey, not just the final 17%. Otherwise, it's like you sponsored this great event at the stadium or the ballpark or something like that, and despite spending tens of thousands of dollars for a VIP box and lavish catering or whatever, they have a rule. They said they don't want slimy salespeople in the door before the fourth quarter of the game or before the eighth inning. You say, that's crazy. We're the ones writing the check. How can they lock us out? They've locked us out because people don't want to engage with like that anymore. In order for you to get out of the vendor box and improve your sales positioning, your prospects and your customers need to see you as a teacher, a trusted advisor, a consultant, and a subject matter expert. The buyer's journey for colocation has changed drastically. So you really have to ask yourself, are you keeping up, or is your sales and marketing, your entire go-to-market playbook, living in the past in a bygone era? Because if we're going to remain relevant, select the right niches, and avoid commoditization, the way we evaluate our competition, the way we evaluate our marketplace opportunities really needs to change. So when it comes to analyzing your competitive position, when I used to present this session at conferences back in the 2010s, I used to present live examples. And you may have to squint a little bit or enlarge your screen to see some of the company names that are on there. But what's super interesting is most of those brands have still survived. Most of them are considerably larger than they are now. So at least one that I recognize that went through a big rebrand about 6-7 years ago, so you may not even remember its original incarnation. Used to be a little bit of a struggle to pull these examples out because I needed to go to companies where there was no commercial relationship with my company, where there was no type of thing precluding me from talking about it at a macro level was going on. And I also needed to find interesting examples of companies that were doing great things and companies that were doing not so great things. So there'd be some interesting comparison contrasted. But originally I was a little concerned that people might be annoyed that I was talking about and spotlighting certain companies versus criticizing others. But I was actually wrong. There was no angry person coming up and waving their finger at me after these sessions. Even though, of course, I explained that these were all publicly available metrics. It turned out actually the opposite happened. People from large companies came up to lavish praises, including one that was, I think it was either a CTO or COO of what I'd consider at the time a large regional, now probably bordering on one of the smaller national colocation operators. And the session ended up being one of the 5 highest rated at this particular conference among more than 100 sessions. So go figure, this gal never showed up angry. Actually, people were thrilled with the comparisons. But all the M&A, all the merger activities that were going on then and still continue to accelerate now, puts a big monkey wrench, throws a big damper in the ability to keep that kind of content current and evergreen. So I'll briefly share the methodology and framework I've used to evaluate various degrees of competition. So at a high level, I look at direct competitors, indirect competitors, and non-business model. Direct competitors are the ones that show up during your sales process who have the ability to potentially screw things up for you. They're typically in the exact same geographic region, very similar kinds of size, and you know exactly who they are because you and your sales team are like, I can't believe this is happening again. How can we be more effective against them? Indirect are typically a lot bigger, a lot smaller, or play in a different geographic market. So you're basically your primary market is a secondary or tertiary market for them. Non-business model competitors, this is the one that throws everyone for a loop that they overlook. Non-business models competitors are companies that create content on topics that matter most to your buyer personas and your business model, but really have nothing to do with your business model. So in the colocation space, this might be trade publications, conferences, channel programs, sales and marketing related companies in this space. Either way, they're completely different business models, not just different size, not just different location, but in the battle for attention, whether it's a search engine results page, whether it's a YouTube search, whether it's social media, something else like that, you're going to have to deal with the fact that they're trying to get visibility, topic visibility, and thought leadership positioning around this topic. In terms of your thought leadership and website authority, you want to look at things like your homepage and your navigation. Do you see evidence of educational content, personas, the journey, and title tag? In terms of discoverability, how well you're doing with the amount of inbound links and domain authority. A big thing that a lot of people overlook is LinkedIn by far and away, unless you have a really bizarrely niched colocation company, it is the dominant channel for most of the buyer personas that are most interesting to colocation operators. So because of that, it's important to wear your Sunday, it's important to show up well on LinkedIn. So if your resources are really, really limited, sure, in a perfect world, you'd love to be everywhere, but it's just not practical. But we do want to make sure that we have a good grasp on the number of employees in LinkedIn across all the key go-to-market functions, across sales, marketing, the ratio of sales to marketing headcount, the total employees, the employees active on LinkedIn in the past 30 days. These are all publicly available metrics that you can and should be tracking. And at a high level, when it comes to buy-in at a company culture level, like how bought in is the CEO, the sales director, the marketing director? Is there a recent professional headshot that looks like it was image, that photo that was looked like it was taken in the last 5 or 10 years? And do they have at least the minimum 500 connections to be credible on LinkedIn? In terms of the company social media, the strategy for in the competitive space, you certainly can track the reach across a variety of different channels. Again, if you're relatively new to this, your buyer personas will almost certainly validate that LinkedIn and YouTube probably should get considerable weighting over all of the others. And you also can certainly see by looking at their profiles how many updates they've posted in the last 30 days. You can also go through their websites and look and see, like, do they know what a conversion looks like? Are they generating leads throughout the full journey on their website? Is there educational content, or is it really just like a glorified brochure with just a simple contact us, where there's really only one place to raise your hand and say, yeah, I'm kind of sort of interested? Is there a blog that educates and builds trust? Are there good calls to action embedded in the blog to convert more visitors into leads? And then at the most kind of basic technology stack infrastructure level, is it mobile friendly? I sure as heck hope. By now, Google's been prioritizing this for the better part of 10 years, that they're mobile friendly and that SSL is in place to secure sockets. Certainly, you can't be in the content game without having a content management system. You just won't update your website fast enough. Immediate gratification, you're selling to Veruca Salt, right? So we need live chat and marketing automation. You really have no idea how weird the hours are going to be. The prospects show up on your doorstep till you start actually tracking these things. You may think that most of your buyer personas are doing all of the research 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. Nonsense. If they're stressed out, if there's a server down emergency, they may be looking for a solution at 2 o'clock in the morning or 2 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon on a holiday weekend. You got to be prepared with automation. So why do local colos tend to frequently lose deals to large national and emerging national operators? One thing that certainly comes up a lot of the time is the single location, like no thought to business continuity and backup and disaster recovery. Vast differences in the size of the sales and marketing armies. In really small companies, investment in any kind of digital is usually an afterthought. All the budget's going to a cabana party in Las Vegas or a big golf tournament or something, which is great for one of the 28 touch points. But what about the other 27? What's going to happen the other 364 days of the year when you're not in front of that prospect? They're typically not thinking in acquiring talent as vital assets for growth. The sales process that is followed throughout the team is not documented, virtually non-existent. There's a poor grasp of product market fit and no educational content. One of the challenges that we see especially prevalent with local colocation operators is they're chasing the same clients as managed service providers, and their marketing and sales for the most part is anemic relative to what the nationals are doing. It's still significantly better most of the time than micro managed service providers, but there's usually a big disparity. And because of that, because they only show up at the tail end, they're forced to compete on price, and they're selling and marketing like it's still the mid 2010s. It's not a great place to be. So what do some of the solutions look like? We'll get into that in a few minutes, but another big emerging threat, of course, that everyone is constantly having to think about is public cloud. But there's also demand for private cloud, and there's also demand for hybrid. But of course, Amazon and Alphabet, Google, and Microsoft Azure all have enormous brands to lean on. So when it comes to your content assets, what should you be thinking about? Well, at a high level, the way colocation is research and purchase has changed. Many companies are clearly living in the past. We talked about huge differences that Gartner and McKinsey have found in how people navigate the buyer's journey. We talked about the importance of being present throughout the full buyer's journey, not just the bottom of the eighth inning through the rest of the game, not just the end of the fourth quarter. We need to show up for the full game. Otherwise, someone else is the one that's teaching them how to evaluate all of the options and frames all the criteria and is coaching them. And they see that person as the guru. That person has the trust. That person has the attention. If you want that person, you want that company to be you, it's time to get serious about this, because your best prospects and purchase some probably very differently than you're currently marketing and selling. They're using Google and live streaming and review websites, and they're asking questions on social, listening to podcasts, listening a little bit meta. They go to webinars and listen to webinar recordings like this, and they ask questions all day long of their personal assistants and chatbots. Your buyers no longer want to buy colocation the way you're marketing and selling them. And in a lot of ways, you should be thinking of reinventing most of your go-to-market team to look more like Big Four consultants, thought leaders, and expert advisors. This largely centers around sales professionals repositioning for a doctor-patient relationship. You are no longer going to be the gatekeeper of information. Search engines, social media reviews, and especially chatbots, whether it's ChatGPT, Gemini, Perplexity, Copilot, they're where the attention is. So the question is, like, how do you still stay relevant when they've clearly run the battle? It's very clear that it's time for positioning, and it's really critical that anyone in a sales and marketing and go-to-market role in and around the data center industry needs to get out of the vendor box and be seen as more of a partner, and stay out of the vendor box. Because when it comes to educating and building trust with your prospects, there is a vital role for data center sales, marketing, customer success, product, and channel partnerships. But the default plan is probably not going to get you there. So we need to do what we can to differentiate, improve competitive positioning, be seen as a subject matter expert. The sales professionals, the go-to-market professionals that want a true doctor-patient consultative relationship, even if they're not at the stage where they're ready to put out their own thought leadership, they should think about like being the tour guide or being the consummate concierge and director of everything that's going on in their company and everything that's going on in the industry, so they can point their prospects and customers in that direction. And over time, as you start consuming everyone else's thought leadership, you'll more than likely develop some unique insights of your own that you'll want to share and package into that kind of high quality content. So what does it take to attract the right strangers into your world, into your digital front door? In a buyer-centric world, the burden is on us as colocation operators to ensure that we're only working with good fit clients. What does that mean? It first starts by making sure that you're not chasing vanity metrics. You can see the HIPPO, the highest paid person in the organization. If you've never heard that acronym before, they have really strong opinions. And they care about things like fans and followers and likes and retweets and subscribers, but that doesn't really do much for the bottom line. The digital marketer many times, and again, excuse these gross overgeneralizations here, but I want to just make sure that we get on the table here that if you're not careful, you could end up chasing metrics that really don't have a significant impact on the business. The digital marketer or the person that's directing the activities of the digital marketer may insist on spending a ton of your overall budget on branding and design, engagement, paying for expensive PR outreach to try to get some big name media outlets to validate what you're doing, and analyst opinions, which are even more expensive. And the revenue focused CEO instead is a lot more focused on growth. They're a lot more focused on things that get to the bottom line. So they're looking at conversion rates, They care about deal stages, lifetime value, the cost of client acquisition, and product market fit. What it largely comes down to is we want to make sure that we're attracting the right stakeholders, the right decision makers, the right buyer personas in the right places at the right time, and most of all in the right context, so we can get you out of the vendor box and be seen as a teacher, subject matter expert, trusted advisor, and consultant. Because if you want to ask yourself, and obviously it's not a very flattering picture, I apologize if anyone chooses that as your wardrobe choice or positioning choice for selling colocation services. But in general, probably most of us will agree that that look probably isn't engendering trust. And he's saying, come on, dude, what'll it take to get you into that Golo cabinet today? That's not the look that we're probably going for if we want to achieve trusted advisor status. Because on the left-hand side of the screen there, with the unflattering used car salesperson look going on, it's a vendor who bids and pitches and generates proposals and begs for meetings, maybe even bribes people for meetings. Want to get a gift card? How about a bigger gift card for showing up? No. That's not what we're looking for. We want the positioning of being seen as a partner, a technology partner, a consultant, diagnosing before we prescribe, getting paid to put out a report, do an audit of what we think they need best for a roadmap, and prospects coming to you as opposed to the other way around. So if we're going to look to reverse engineer colocation revenue growth, we first start by looking at what kind of new revenue sources that we need to get these new clients. New clients, of course, require new sales opportunities, and new sales opportunities require leads. So we work backwards from revenue to clients, from clients to sales opportunities, from sales opportunities to leads. So how do we go about generating these high quality leads? What it largely comes down to is acknowledging that most colocation websites, especially the locals and small regionals, severely underperform in the lead generation department. And in the time and era that we're in right now, this is a massive liability because so much of the journey is happening without you. And if you don't have the ability to generate high quality leads from your website with educational content that puts stuff in the relationship bank account before you try to extract things out of the relationship bank account, if you don't have any of this, if you're just using your website as a glorified brochure, and I get new clients that come to me all the time that are dealing with this, there's a lot of times it's sad because there only tends to be one or two or maybe three places on the entire website where a hot prospect can raise their hands. And relative to the competition, you're just getting buried. So what does it take to turn this around? It takes the mindset that your website should be your hardest working 24/7, 365 sales rep. They don't get sick. They don't need time off to recharge or reinvent themselves or go sabbaticals. They don't get into trouble around the office with coworkers. They don't overpromise and underdeliver. They don't sacrifice margin and pricing power for short-term gains. They don't threaten to take their book of business elsewhere. But in terms of getting the lead generation requirements right, to do this the right way, it's that hyper focus. Remember, we started out by talking about the holo and the volo, the horizontal colo operator and the vertical colo operator specialist. You really need lead generation offers for each of your most important buyer personas. That's why it comes down to prioritizing a primary, a secondary, and a tertiary. Because if resources are limited, when push comes to shove, we got to prioritize the primary, right? The biggest economic impact, the most strategic to our business. And we also need assets for each stage of the journey because we need to be with them throughout the entire journey, not just the last 17% of the journey. And of course, we need to follow best practices, and the content needs to be valuable enough that people are willing to trade their business card for what's on the other side of the landing page. From the friends don't let friends department, don't invest in paid search or paid social, sponsored social, until you have good lead generation conversion paths built and good lead nurturing content to take early stage leads and accelerate them into sales opportunities. And at the risk of getting a little meta, what you're attending today, a webinar, probably needs to be a big part of your playbook for taking early stage leads and nurturing them and educating and building trust. Remember, at the end of the day, all colo leads are not created equal. So you need to constantly be measuring and iterating and improving on what's working versus what's not, and iterating and improving your results over time. To accelerate more of your leads into sales opportunities, this is another big challenge that we see a lot of people facing. Again, be mindful of just how different the journey is today compared to 5 or 10 years ago. It's self-directed. The buyer's in the driver's seat. There's nothing we can do about it if we sit back and complain about it. We actually have to do something productive about it. And what's most productive about it is recognizing that content stands in for what used to be one-on-one conversations. If we don't have great educational content, we're basically calling in sick. We're waving the white flag. We're saying, well, not fair. We want it to still stay like it is 10, 20 years ago. Well, here's the interesting part with the not fair. This industry, when you talk to like Jensen Huang for NVIDIA, that sees like $1 trillion coming into data centers in the next 4 years. And when you talk to Michael Dell, who sees 100-fold growth in data centers over the next decade, we're all profiting off of AI, right? Everyone, generative AI going into data centers, high performance computing, all this stuff is being a massive growth enabler for the data center industry. Yet we're sitting here and saying, well, how about we sell that out of the back of our Model T Ford or our horse and buggy? Because our prospects won't notice that everyone else in the world has websites with lead generation content and videos and webinars and all that stuff. And we'll just pretend that we're so special that we can keep marketing and selling like we did 20 years ago, and they won't notice. It's like, seriously, that's your playbook? So we need to be aware of the different stages that colocation leads go through, from subscriber, lead, marketing qualified, sales qualified, opportunity, customer. Evangelist is a big deal. Promoter is a big deal. What does that mean? Is when we look at anything that's based on recurring revenue, it's not just about the initial contract being signed. It's onboarding, it's retention, it's expansion, and digital word of mouth. So we need to do a fantastic job of being able to attract and retain the right clients, because that's incredibly important to our growth, both within those accounts and similar kinds of accounts. So when we come back to looking at the tic-tac-toe board again, and we line up our 3 sample personas, CTO Tom, CFO Fred, and compliance Connie across the top, we have our buyer personas. And we think about like, okay, what kind of educational content do we have for CTOs, CFOs, and compliance officers? And do we have content that covers the full buyer's journey? Do we have a minimum of one offer that covers awareness, consideration, and decisions? So we're there when they have the initial problem, when they have the initial challenge, the initial goal they're trying to figure out. We're there in the middle when they're comparing all the different options and starting to give what they're trying to figure out a name, which many times they're only starting to think about colocation and managed services and hybrid cloud and outsourced digital infrastructure and everything towards the middle in the consideration stage. And of course, if you're doing a first inning, second inning kind of elementary school age job on this, you're probably okay in the decision stage, but I wouldn't take that as a given either. I see a lot of colocation operators that could stand to dramatically improve their positioning in the decision stage as well, especially for their primary buyer persona. So the building blocks to do this is it starts with strong recognition of who these people are, what they care about, what gets them promoted, what potentially gets them fired, and making sure that we have great educational content that helps them understand how to navigate this for someone in the role in a company just like theirs. And that's where the VOLO, the vertically focused colocation operator, becomes incredibly important. So you're going to need premium content, premium that's so good that it can be gated behind a landing page for each persona and each journey stage. If you've heard people say people don't fill out forms anymore, I call BS on that all day long. It's more than likely that your content just isn't good enough, and your offer and your copywriting and your landing page just aren't good enough. If you're providing great tangible value that's so good that in another parallel universe you might be able to charge for that content, you will get people all day long filling out those right forms. And the ones that don't probably weren't a fit to start with. You don't want to go overboard. You need to make sure that it's proportional. The value exchange is proportional to what you're providing and what you're asking for. But yeah, you need premium content. You need conversion paths. You need to be able to segment your leads. The CFO cares about vastly different issues than the CTO, and the compliance manager, compliance officer cares about vastly different issues than the other two. And the better job we can do at being hyper-specific and personalizing that and grabbing them by the virtual shirt collars as they're scrolling through, the better job we're going to do at attracting attention. And we need to be aware that this isn't happening 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. It's 7/24, 365. We need automation, and we need events, webinars, and in-person webinars like seminars, sponsored. The better job we can do with controlling the agenda, controlling the environment, the better off we'll be. But yeah, all of this is a balancing act. So the key thing to recognize, though, is we're not done when the colocation sale is closed. Onboarding, continuing education, customer success matters more than most realize. So what does it take to scale revenue growth across your new and your existing clients? If you've never thought about this before, for those of you that don't tend to run your go-to-market like other kinds of technology companies like SaaS would run this. Customer marketing is a huge deal. In some data centers, it's called customer success or account management, but it largely starts with developing good structured onboarding for your new clients. What's the experience that you want someone to have when they sign on? So you're teaching your new clients how to get the most value out of what you provide. You're introducing them to all the other services that could potentially help them in the future with their goals, plans, and challenges across both the initial location and potentially additional locations that you work across. Great customer success teams get their customer acquisition flywheel turning faster when they acknowledge that digital word of mouth is a big deal. So customers need to become promoters. They need to become really bought into what you're doing in order to bring you more strangers. If the opposite happens and they're very unbought into and underwhelmed, annoyed, pissed off, angry, whatever it is, well, they'll do something also, and it's going to be the opposite of bringing you more strangers. So what does the toolbox look like for driving more revenue from existing clients? It comes down to good segmentation, personalizing the content, good regular surveying, events like this. You certainly can have different events for prospects versus customers, and paying attention to what's being said about you and your brand on social media. We need to remember that in a world where machine learning and AI influence everything, you're not going to get very far with strategy if you're just copycatting the competition and chasing the hunches of your highest paid person in the organization. So the final area that I want to talk about today before we introduce you to some recommended resources and open it up for Q&A is to let your best clients and buyer personas dictate your niches. What does this mean? Well, we need to be aware of the end results of what happens to a prospect that becomes an opportunity and an opportunity that becomes a new client. And the fancy word for this within CRM, customer relationship management, and marketing technology and sales technology is closed loop reporting. You know exactly which lead gen and sales acceleration campaigns influence which new clients close, so you can shift resources from underperforming to overperforming campaigns and improve results over time. This is the exact same mindset that you would use with any kind of paid search or paid social campaign as well, is being mindful of the fact that you can track things on a very granular level and continually improve over time. There's a big problem with this, though. For any of you that have an iPhone, you know, about 2 years ago, Apple started blocking third-party cookies. Google's on their way to doing this. This is part of the reason why very recently there were rumors going around that Google's parent company, Alphabet, might be interested in buying a big marketing technology, sales technology company like HubSpot. Why? Because they need to get much tighter integration between what's going on the ad platform and what the closed end outcome looks like when revenue is generated, things go on the deal board, when there's a deal size and everything like that. Because classic attribution technology based on third-party cookies is very quickly becoming history. It's becoming somewhere between less reliable and worthless. Google Alphabet's working on some innovative solutions. LinkedIn's already has some things in place. I imagine they're going to continue investing in this quite aggressively. And none of this is addressing dark social, where a ton of digital word of mouth comes into play. So to close the performance gaps, you need the right building blocks. It's the right talent, it's the right technology, the right strategy. If you skip or underinvest in any one of these areas, you just simply will not be able to compete with the way that people are researching and making decisions around colocation today. So what do we end up with at the end of the buyer's journey when we look at CTO Tom, CFO Fred, and compliance Connie? We end up with knowing some values because we have product market fit of what their average lifetime value, what it's worth to us as a client when that's the lead person on the account, what their average cost of acquisition looks like, and what the average sales cycle length looks like. And you can see we've tracked all these numbers, and you can see in green what the winners were, because we have vastly different values depending on whether the foot in the door is the CFO, the CTO, or the compliance. And again, your value, your mileage will vary. These are just representative examples. But in this particular case, a client that's led with an internal champion who's the CFO far outpaces one with the CTO and compliance. The cost of acquisition tends to be lower, but the sales cycle is longer. So you can close faster with the CTO more than likely because CTO Tom is the one who's getting supremely stressed out and losing vacation time over downtime. But the upside will be much higher and the cost of acquisition will be much lower with the CFO. So again, these aren't the perfect answers necessarily for your business, but I want you to be mindful of this mindset of being able to figure things out over time. As a word of caution, there are two things that kill initiatives like this more than anything else, basically living in the past. One is severe underinvestment, both timelines and financial. and time relative to headcount, and 2, the CEO not believing in this. If your CTO is not leading the alignment around this across your entire GTM team, especially if you're a local or regional player, you're sunk before you started. If you're a national or global, yeah, there'll be a chief commercial officer or a chief revenue officer. That's the main point person. But if your company is fewer than 200 employees and you can't get the CEO's attention to spend time on this for a half hour, a couple times a month or something like that, it's more than likely not going to happen. It's a big culture change in a lot of organizations. So we've talked about what it takes to go from the beginning, the middle, the later stages of the journey. We were just looking at attracting the right strangers and lead generation, sales cycle acceleration. What can you do around specifically acting on some of the recommendations that were introduced in today's webinar? Well, today you've been introduced to 10 core concepts that are covered a lot more fully in Go-to-Market Strategy Reboot Camp. This is a self-paced training course with a little over 11 hours of on-demand video training, 49 lessons across 8 units, and it has 118 downloadable worksheets and checklists to help you speed up your implementation and acceleration of this kind of mindset into your company. You can learn more about that by visiting the URL up there on the screen that we've dropped into the chat pane at dcsmi.com/course. This is based on more than 20 years of advising and consulting with more than 150 founders, CEOs, CROs, and CMOs and GTM teams, distilled down into 11 hours of super affordable on-demand video training. And the checklists and the worksheets and the templates save an enormous amount of time. When I run into folks like yourself at conferences, it's always the worksheets that they're still raving about 5, 10, 20 years later. I wrote a book for Microsoft Press in the late 1990s, and I still, every year or two, run into people at events that are still using them. Like, you still use something that I built 20, like, yeah. I had someone that put a LinkedIn recommendation on my profile a short while ago that said the only person that's had more impact on their career growth in their managed service business than what I taught them was Michael Gerber from eMyth. I'm like, holy crap, that's pretty impactful. So that's cool to see. So anyway, this is the Go-to-Market Strategy Reboot Camp. This is the outline for the course. It's covered in 8 different fundamental areas, which is the exact same methodology that we use in our annual Go-to-Market Strategy training program. And again, it's all about the right people in the right places at the right time and in the right context. This course is available on our website for $500, but you may be able to get it completely for free today. Here's how this works. If you sign up for our data center go-to-market diagnostic workshop, which is only $250, it's not going to be $250 forever, but it's currently $250 at dcsmi.com/consulting, you will get a single user free enrollment into our Go-to-Market Strategy Reboot Camp as a new client welcome gift, which again has a $500 value. So again, we'll drop the information about that and how to take advantage of that in the chat pane there. The fine print for that is this will be available through the end of this week through midnight Pacific time on Friday, April 26th. You need to be registered for our webinar today on 10 ways for colocation data centers to find the right niches and avoid commoditization. You need to sign up through the URL that's on the screen. There's only 8 of those available because frankly, it's pretty time consuming to deliver and prepare those with all the insights and prep work and recap work that goes into putting that all together. And please allow a full business day for us to give you access in the learning management system that the course is hosted on. So with that, we have a little bit of time for question and answer. As I mentioned earlier today, we're going to start with the questions that were sent in ahead of time. If you have questions that you've thought about through today, especially if they're voted up, I will prioritize those in the chat pane. But I just want to remind you that at a high level, think about whether you want to be a holo or a volo, whether you want to be a horizontal colocation generalist or a vertical colocation expert that's deeply niched around a narrowly defined niche specialization, gets way more leverage in these conversations, gets prospects coming to you as opposed to you chasing them. So that's why you see the holo in tears up there, very sad up on the top of the screen on the slide. And that's where you see the volo as the very empowered superhero ready to leap tall buildings in a single bound. So the first question that I want to address is, what does it take to find the right customers? To find the right customers, what it largely comes down to is recognizing that there's no right answer for everyone. It's going to vary tremendously depending on the size of your company, where you're located, your geographic coverage, any industry specializations that you have, the capital that you have available, your internal resources. But what I always encourage people to do is look first at where you've been most successful. Who are your happiest clients? Where are the case studies coming from, and what do they have in common? From there, you build your ideal client profile so you know the geographic parameters, the size parameters, any industry parameters. And once you've figured out the commonalities at a company level, then you look at the stakeholders within those companies that you need to build relationship with. Those are your buyer personas. And with limited resources, you'll certainly want to prioritize a primary buyer persona and a secondary buyer persona, and maybe a tertiary buyer persona. But finding the right customers first starts with getting to product market fit. So you know exactly who your clients are, what kinds of co-location they buy from your company, at what price points, at what contractual terms, what's scaled especially well, and who do you want more of? So that's what, when it comes down to RIGHT as opposed to the other one, the correct kind of clients, we need to be very tuned into and very self-aware of where our company does best and focus our entire go-to-market playbook around that. Next question was, how do we improve challenges around the sales cycle for the data center business? The most important thing that you can do to improve the sales cycle around the data center business is recognize that the buyer's journey that people go through today is so different than it was as recently in 5 or 10 years ago. And if you're still doing the same stuff that you did 5 or 10 years ago, there's a really good chance that you're overdue for a reboot, for an update, for a refresh of what you're doing, just simply because so much of the buyer's journey is now self-driven. So many people strongly prefer to be in the driver's seat, a buyer's-driven buyer's journey. They've developed this allergy to spending time with sales professionals. And if we want to get back into those conversations, we can't show up looking like a vendor or looking like a traditional salesperson. We need to show up looking more like a consultant, a trusted advisor, a subject matter expert. That's how we get prospects to want to spend time with us, as opposed to begging for 10 or 15 minutes of attention. And the one that makes my skin crawl is bribing people with a gift card or something like that to get them to spend attention. It's like, what the WTF, man? So don't do that. We need to be a lot more. That's why I introduced the idea of the holo and the volo. If you want to be the vertical co-location specialist, it starts by recognizing that finding the right niches, differentiating, competitively positioning is incredibly important to avoid the crushing weight of commoditization and pricing pressure that will drag your company down into being a nonprofit. I've literally seen co-location companies in the last 6 months to a year being escorted into a merger. Maybe that's the best way of calling it, because their margins and their cash flow position and everything, where there's going to be a lot more roll up. So if you want to be in a great position to exit in the driver's seat with your roll up, you need to really own this kind of stuff. If you're hoping that it's going to magically solve themselves and people are going to bring back out their dial-up modems and their Blackberries and dust off the phone book and the newspapers and everything and start using that to be an influential part of this process, like see, the thing is, every time a 75-year-old CEO retires, they're generally not replaced by someone that's digitally resistant. They're replaced by someone that's a generation younger and is bringing in more Gen X and more millennial and more Gen Z, and the stuff just is going to keep accelerating to the point where there's more and more completely self-directed, self-paced buyer journeys, even for things as as routine as unroutine co-location processes. I know of one of the major co-location telecommunications companies that as early as like 10 years ago actually had a whole team that was developing a productized co-location offering. And they did pretty well, and they had a really good exit because of that. So think about what you can do to simplify your sales process for 80% of your buyers. And in terms of the sales cycle, be there the whole time. Be there awareness, consideration, and decision. Use good segmentation, use good email nurturing, good workflow automation. And of course, at the risk of being super meta, if you don't have a webinar program, if you're not doing online events, offline events, you are totally missing the boat when it comes to what you need to develop deep relationships with your prospects and customers to educate and build trust in a one-to-many relationship. Next question was, will you be sharing the slides? Yes. Well, we're not planning on sending out the slides directly, but we will be sharing the recording if there is enough demand or you want a copy of the slides. If you open up a ticket, we could probably get you a copy of those. But the default way that we tend to share this content is the recording, which will have a nice large HD copy of all the slides that are in there. If you want more, feel free to reach out. Question number 3 is, what does it take to grow our business? the key thing is when it comes to growth is everyone has a different definition of what growth looks like for their business. What I'd encourage you to do, and this is something I work with on clients on our annual program, is define your SMART goals, your specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound goal of what that growth looks like for your company. For most companies, it probably centers around a certain seven-figure revenue target, sometimes an eight-figure. It depends on the context. If your global seven figure is not going to move the needle, if your national seven figure is not going to move the needle, if your local, maybe regional, so something in the seven figure, low eight figure growth starts to be meaningful. So start with a big picture goal, figure out what your average client deal size is worth, what an average client spends on colocation, figure out how many new clients that you need, work backwards to sales opportunities, work backwards to leads. That's what it takes to be able to grow your business, but get really specific around what those growth goals look like, specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. Have a focus each quarter around a certain set of like 3 OKRs, objectives and key results. Have key performance indicators, KPIs that you're watching on a regular basis. And for the love of all that's good and holy, do not chase vanity metrics. Be very aware the cookies are preventing us from getting perfect attribution anymore. But you got to know your buyer personas. You need to know where they're spending their time and attention. And there has to be a lot of thought given to how you can attract them, engage with them, and stay with them throughout the entire buyer's journey through as many of those 28 touch points as possible. So you're not relegated and stuck in the vendor box of having to compete purely on price to win these deals. I have time for 2 more questions. How do we create and execute on a demand generation plan? So whether you call it demand generation, lead generation, there's gray areas there depending on the size of your company, go to market. What it largely comes down to is figuring out who's the company that the finite list of companies that you need to get in front of. We call that like ideal client profiles, the blueprint for that. And from a tactical perspective, that's usually known as account-based marketing, ABM, or account-based selling, where you have anywhere from a couple hundred to a couple thousand strategic clients that you want to get your content offers in front of. And obviously, before you spend any kind of money on outbound or any kind of money on ads, you need great content offers that are highly valuable in the eye of the beholder. It focuses on the goals and the challenges that are top of mind for that buyer persona. And you need a good strategy for taking people from awareness to consideration to decision. In most cases, it's some kind of segmentation, personalization, email nurturing, like email marketing automation. Contrary to what you hear, the death of email marketing has been grossly exaggerated. It's actually the opposite. I see more energy and resources going into email marketing than social media in the coming months and years, because it's not subject to the same kind of algorithm blockages if you do it the right way or pay to play. So you need good emails. And then in most cases for colocation, where you need to educate and build trust, whether it's with managed service providers as potential channel partners, or CTOs or CFOs or CISOs or compliance people, generally events work really, really well. You just have to make sure that the event is so good that you're providing what I call conference grade content. What is conference grade content? If you were speaking at one of the big national conferences, to have a shot at getting on the agenda, you send in a proposal and a committee looks at it and says, oh, that title looks pretty good. The abstract looks pretty good. Let's check out who this person is to see if they have street cred to be able to speak at our conference. If you pass all those, they put you in the digital brochure. You're up on the website. The next step is not so fast. You're not getting in front of the group till we see your slides. 4 weeks out, they want to see your slides, and make sure what you say is not going to be a glorified infomercial. Because the last thing in the world they want is for someone to go into your session, feel like they're being pitched by a used car salesperson, and walk out shaking their head. No, you want the opposite. You want like what I do when I walk into a room, where my goal is for every single person in the room to give me the highest possible rating on that mobile app. And if there's something that precludes them from doing that, I want to know about it so I can fix it. That's the mindset you need to take into all of that. With a webinar, look at your average session time. If it's a 60-minute webinar, you better make sure that the average person is spending most of those 60 minutes there. If they're leaving after 5 or 10 minutes, which is the equivalent of someone walking out of a conference session after a few minutes, you've messed up. Conference grade content, delivering a ton of value, so they walk out with tons of action items and inspired and motivated to take those next steps, is incredibly important to execute on your demand generation plan. So that's the mindset to take into your events, whether they're online, offline, a combination of the two. A lot of it depends on your business model. You're targeting practical logistics. In many cases, that's not an either or. You probably ideally want to do and. But the demand generation should be focused on personas, what they care about, their biggest goals and challenges, and how you can educate and build trust around those. And the final question that I'm going to have time to take today comes down to, how do we get access to key decision makers? This is a great one. And the reason that it's so important to be focusing on how to get access to great decision makers is it's getting harder and harder to cut through the noise. What does that mean? There is not a company on the planet that hasn't reverted to decision by committee. So, whereas like 10 years ago, account-based marketing was a nice to have, today, even if you get 5 minutes with the CEO, they're going to punt it back to the rest of the team. The one thing that most people don't think about when it comes to getting to the decision maker is great content can do wonders to get other stakeholders to introduce you to their coworkers, to their boss, to their colleagues. What does that mean? Like, for example, when someone signs up for this webinar and a few minutes later they get a suggestion back, which if you've ever attended one of our webinars, you know we do when we follow through on this. Who else from your company needs to be at this? We know it takes a village to pick the right niches and avoid commoditization. So who else is involved in your colocation business? Maybe it's this role, that role, this role, that role. And you'd be shocked at how often that works because it's much lower risk for someone to share a piece of content or a free event invitation than it is for them to put their neck out on the line and recommend your colocation specifically. So if you're doing ebooks, if you're doing webinars, if you're doing events and you're not using this strategy, you are totally missing the boat. Because this is one of the fastest ways to grow the number of people within a particular account that are talking about your content. And if you get the right reaction, they're like, wow, this stuff is really helpful. No one's ever framed it this way. They really got me thinking. Who's this company? What do they do again? And when you've achieved those couple of things, like, wow, this is really helpful. What do they do? That's when you start to get talked about at the team meetings. That's when you start to get talked about in the Slack channel. That's when the dominoes start to fall and you get in front of the right decision maker and start to get enough votes around the full committee for your internal champion to be successful with this kind of initiative. So let me see if we can take one more. So the question is, I represent a company that does modeling for modular data centers, building infrastructure management. Is there any advice directly for owners of colos? Yeah. When it comes to building management, it really depends on how big the company is. Just like with all companies that need some form of outsourced IT, whether they're SMBs, whether they're mid-market, whether they're enterprise, the smaller they are, the more individual hats a single person wears, the bigger they are, the more specialized they are. Like a great example is a colocation operator with 10 to 50 employees probably has an in-house marketing manager. How senior they are, how big of a team that person can grow around them, how much outsourced budget and everything they have, that remains to be seen with how aggressive they want to be. If you look at a company like TierPoint, QTS, Digital Realty, Involta, Flexential, dozens, if not hundreds, in that Equinix, Digital Realty, in that particular role. So it becomes way more specialized. So instead of wearing 14 different hats, one person owns one particular facet of one stack within there. And it's the same thing, whether we're talking about facilities management, whether we're talking about technology, whether we're talking about electrical, power, energy, environmental monitoring, physical security, cybersecurity. The smaller the company is, the smaller the colo operator is, the more likely it is that it's going to be super easy to get to the right person, because that person is probably more, even if you get the semi-relevant person, they're not far away from the right person. And a huge company, getting the targeting dialed in becomes more important because that person may be significantly more removed from both a lateral and seniority kind of level to the right person. So again, the answer really depends a lot on the company size, getting to product market fit, getting to your case studies. For a smaller company, it's a lot easier to just target the whole company. For a larger company, a larger co-location provider with hundreds or even thousands of employees, and again, it's a relatively small handful or two of companies nationally and globally that are north of 10,000 employees. At that size, it becomes more important to dial in what you're doing with roles and job titles, all the things that LinkedIn does a phenomenally great job with when it comes to Sales Navigator and campaign management. But yeah, at a high level, that's how I'd approach that. So I'm so glad that you were able to join us today for our webinar on 10 ways for colocation data centers to find the right niches and avoid commoditization. For those of you that are serious about taking this to the next level, we have a great special offer available that you can learn more about and take and sign up for at dcsmi.com/consulting. Just click through on the pane there. When you sign up for our diagnostic workshop, you'll get one free user enrollment, one single user enrollment into data center, into go-to-market strategy reboot camp, which is as a new client welcome gift. If you have any questions that come up after today's webinar, feel free to reply to the follow-up email messages. You'll be getting a survey shortly. We'd love to get your feedback. And you can always feel free to visit our website at dcsmi.com and click on the chat icon. Again, I'm Joshua Feinberg, CEO of DCSMI. We're all about elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market professionals and the growth of the data center industry. It's a phenomenal time to be in the data center industry, whether it's Jensen Huang from NVIDIA calling for $1 trillion in investments going into the data center space in the next 4 years, or whether it's Michael Dell calling for a 100-fold increase in data center demand over the next decade. It's a great time to be in this industry, but the gains are not going to be distributed evenly because of vast differences in buyer preferences and the vast differences in how people research and navigate and make their buyers' decisions. So I hope that's given you some good food for thought today that you can take back to your go-to-market playbook to find the right niches and avoid commoditization. If we can be of help, feel free to reach out anytime. And I wish you great success in growing your colocation or colocation related business. Take care now and enjoy the rest of your day.